Today we're honoring the unbreakable spirit of some of Stillwater County's service members, men who left the quiet plains and rugged hills of Montana to face the trials of war, carving out legacies of courage that echo through time. From crafting tactical dog sleds to surviving the jungles of Bataan, these local heroes didn't just serve, they served with grit and grace. So grab a seat and let's salute the valor etched into the soul of our community. This is the Big Fat Podcast and our They Gazed on the Beartooths series, where we dig into the stories that shaped our corner of Montana, in partnership with the Museum of the Beartooths and made possible by our sponsor, Pinnacle Property of Montana. If at some point you feel we've brought you some value, go ahead and hit that like button. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and share this episode with your history-loving friends.
But I feel like it's a waste of my skill set.
I think that's what we're leading with because I hit record a few minutes ago.
Probably not.
Probably not a good idea.
That's our opening monologue right there. I'm excited.
It's not.
I don't even have to go create anything. We already have it.
Awesome.
Cole, you've served, right?
Yes, I did.
I served.
You did.
Well, we didn't serve. Like these guys served. And so, Penny, let's talk about some of these guys who left us a record and an honorable record that we in Stillwater County can be proud of. Who do you want to start with? Let's start with
John Matovich. And yes, he's related to all the Matoviches in the county.
In the county.
John is no longer with us, but his son John lives out in Nellie's Corner, because Nellie's Corner was this man that we're going to talk about's wife.
His wife was Nellie.
His wife was Nellie.
Oh, it's all coming together for me now.
Yeah. And son John is the one who donated some of his dad's artifacts to the museum and does a ton of volunteer work at the museum. And he continued on with some of his dad's tools and things like that. So he likes to build things out of wood, just like his dad did. So he's got all of his equipment and everything. But his dad, John Matovich, was during World War II, served in the Army, and he was found that he couldn't do combat because of some sort of health issue, and so they found out he was like to build things with wood, cabinetry, and that kind of stuff. So he was stationed at Camp Rimini out of Helena to design and build dog sleds that could be airdropped into Alaska to do support up there against Russia.
Wow.
So we have one of the dog sleds that he made later on in the museum on display, and one of the dog harnesses.
That's pretty hardcore that we were going to take on Russia with dog sleds.
Right? So there's...
And we had somebody that just built dog sleds.
Yeah, that's incredible.
It is incredible.
Tactical dog sleds.
And he's covered pretty well in this book.
Huh.
Which I used to carry in the gift shop at the museum.
My next question. Is that there?
I have it in the archive.
Okay.
So it can be looked at there, but it's called Soldiers and Dog Sleds, A History of Military Dog Mushing by Charles L. Dean. And John is in the book, several pages. You can see all my little bookmarks here, but I'll just read one little thing here to start out. It says one person who did valuable work at the sled shop was Sergeant John A. Matovich. It was through his own hard work, primarily trial and error plus native skill, that he became the sled construction expert, since he had no experience in building dog sleds. His craftsmanship was evident in every sled that was built at Camp Rimini. Matovich commented, "We were always trying to build a better mousetrap, so each sled that was built was improved in quality and design." And I'm not sure why. Maybe Cole knows. Why was it called a mousetrap? I'm not sure on that.
I don't know. But they were built. They were going to invade Norway. The army was. That's what this whole thing was started for, was to invade Norway during World War
Hence
II.
the use of dog sleds.
Hence the use of dog sleds. But they canceled the invasion of Norway and moved this dog unit to different places out in the north. It's kind of cool.
Very cool.
Huh.
Yeah.
What year were we going to invade Norway?
42.
Come to the party.
Right?
This is just, it's just kind of blown, like, how have I not heard of this?
Yeah.
I guess that's what I'm getting at there, is I'm like,
Yeah. Camp Rimini was a former dog sled training center used to train dogs to be used in the invasion of Norway during World War II. The invasion was canceled and all of the over 800 sled dogs and pack dogs were stationed at other remote parts of Basin, Greenland, Antarctica, and Alaska to perform search and rescue missions.
Do we still have dog sleds in the military today?
I don't know. I was in the Air Force, not the Army, but I don't recall ever seeing a dog sled or even seen that option available, because I would have picked that and joined the Army.
yeah, I've not heard of it.
You can still get that book, by the way, on Amazon.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can carry them in the gift shop. I just have not found the exact company to get them from.
So, I mean, he was like, John Matovich was like unique. I mean, as far as I can understand, this is like the only dog sled training facility in the U.S.
I
during
didn't
World
even
War
know
II.
that was Helena's camp name.
It was west of Missoula, Camp Rimini. It wasn't next to Fort Harrison. This is over by McDonald Pass.
McDonald Pass out of Helena.
Out of Helena. What
Yeah,
did I
it's
say, Missoula?
Missoula, yeah.
Helena.
But it's not anymore.
No.
No.
Interesting. And he was the only Montanan in there. Do we know that?
Well, I don't know that he was the only Montanan, being it was in Montana, but he was
Obviously key enough.
key, yes.
Yeah, super interesting.
So one thing they did do is use German prisoners of war to help with it. They used the POWs at the sled shop. Many of the POWs who worked there were skilled carpenters and woodworkers from the German Navy. These men knew nothing about dog sleds, but under the close supervision of Sergeant Matovich, their excellent skills were fully utilized. That there were no civilian experts in the chain of command allowed a tighter rein on operations so the entire program ran more smoothly. The prisoners enjoyed their work because it occupied their time, and they earned 80 cents a day. So
Do we usually pay prisoners of war?
I don't know.
evidently at that time, right?
Yeah, don't get me started. I almost started to talk about all the people that we pay that come into our country that we pay,
Yeah,
we pay
okay.
everybody.
You're
Yes,
right.
yes,
Okay.
we do pay everybody.
So then, just before the end of the war, Sergeant Matovich built models of all the sleds that the sled shop had designed and built during the war. These miniature replicas were true to their full-size counterparts in every detail. The models were sent to the War Department to illustrate the creativity, innovation, and overall enterprise of the sled shop. None are known to exist today. Many people assumed they were filched as souvenirs. Photographs were also taken of the sleds for a report, but it was never completed. Right?
I would want some of those. Can you just imagine having those miniature sleds?
Yeah. Wow, that'd be way cool. Yeah.
So the report was never made, but where's the photograph?
Evidently,
It has to be somewhere.
Yeah, you would think.
Yeah, you would think. Yeah, somewhere. I mean, there's pictures of the dogs training, and they're floating down on a parachute.
Oh,
Of the
that's
dog.
cool.
Parachuting down. But they were training these dogs because I guess...
You're finding photos of that?
Yeah,
Oh, you better save all these.
I will. But the Germans occupied the mountains in Norway, and that's why we were going to go over there, and we were going to go in there with the Devil's Brigade. And these sled dogs were going to be attached to the Devil's Brigade. See, and I didn't know any of this until today. I mean, I had no clue
You
that
were
there was...
today years old.
I was today years old when I learned that Montana and John Matovich from Columbus, Montana, was responsible for a large part of the sled dog unit.
Here's a
That is so
photograph. Can you see that in
Yeah.
the screen?
You know what? Not really. But let's see here.
Okay.
For some reason, it just didn't focus in for some reason.
Too close?
That looked pretty good right there. Yeah.
Okay. And this photograph says it's some of the varied sled designs built at Camp Rimini Sled Shop, courtesy of John A. Matovich. So I wonder if his son John still has those photos.
Yeah, somebody should ask him.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
I definitely will.
Gosh, that is cool. I did not.
Says they had steam bending equipment at the sled shop. Let sled builders usually build one sled a week. In the 2 years that the sled shop operated, over 100 sleds were constructed. There were 6 sled builders who worked full-time at the shop, and soldier drivers also spent time helping out there. Drivers were especially interested in learning about sled construction, particularly the rawhide lashings, to help them make repairs in the field.
That's incredible. So this is funny because I've never heard of steam bending until just probably within a month or two ago. I was building a door, actually a bathroom door, out of some planks that were warped. Okay, and so I tried to look up can I fix these warped boards? What I found out is this. So I can't remember what the general rule is about it, but no, things like pine or Douglas fir, I think it's called evergreen trees, do not bend. So anything that is an evergreen tree, I think that was what the classification was, they don't bend. You can't steam bend. Anything outside of those, you can steam bend. And so what guys would do is, now what they do, I don't know how they did it back then, but they find a way to contain the wood, and they put a ton of heat and steam in there into it, and it will bend. And then they take it out of whatever it is. I saw guys on YouTube that now are doing projects where they will take just a bunch of plastic and wrap it around whatever the project is. They'll tape it, seal it up, and then they will hook up something that's boiling water and pipe a little hose in there to put steam into that thing, and it will saturate it, warm it up, and steam it. And then once it bends that plank, it becomes flexible. They bend it and brace it into position, and then they let go of it, let it dry, let it cool, and then it holds its position. So anyway, there's a little thing I finally figured out about how they, now I can, what I'm saying is I can picture now how they would steam bend a dog sled and why it takes that shape and holds that shape.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, you can't do it with a tree that is evergreen. So
it didn't work for your door.
Did not work for my door.
So were John Matovich's parents or father, was he a carpenter as well? Is that where he learned the trade?
John that still lives here, yes, that's where he learned.
And then where did this John learn?
I don't know.
How many Johns are we talking about?
Not sure there again. So the John that lives here now, he actually goes by Butch. So some people may have met him by Butch. But when you meet him, he always says, I'm John Matovich. So, but I think the Butch name came into play because of all the Johns. So, but he still has a lot of his dad's tools out there on Nellie's Corner, and he builds beautiful, beautiful rocking chairs and all kinds of stuff.
He's probably steam bending out there.
Could be.
I bet he is. He probably picked that up from his dad.
Yeah. And Butch went to school here in Columbus as well, and he served in the Army as well.
Do we know how many sleds they made?
Well, it said 200
Yeah.
in...
238, somewhere in there.
I wonder how long
283.
it took to make one sled. You know what I mean? Like start to finish.
Over 100 sleds were constructed.
Over 100.
How many hours did it how many hours did it take to make a sled? Seems like it would be time consuming.
I would think so.
I've recently been on a kick of these Arctic explorers. I've been reading some books on these guys, and what they learned from the natives is to take some water and pour it over the runners of the dog sleds. So, because, they would tip up the dog sled upside down, take some water, pour it on the runners, and it would freeze, cause a little thin layer of ice on it, and it made a world of difference for the dogs pulling them. They had to do it every so often. It wouldn't hold forever, but the ice on the base of those runners, just boom, the dogs could pull faster, easier, less friction.
Do they do that? What is that race called?
Iditarod?
Yeah, do they do that for the Iditarod, or is that cheating?
I don't know if they do that currently, but I don't see why some water. I mean, you're running on ice anyway, so I would think that that's a legitimate performance-enhancing technique.
So it says whether it's a pack dog, sled dog, sentry dog, airborne dog, or search and rescue dogs, the heritage of the Alaskan war dog is still seen today, specifically in the military working dog teams scattered throughout the state of Alaska at multiple military installations.
That's cool.
So we still have dog teams, huh?
Well, the Army has a whole canine unit.
Yeah.
For all sorts of different reasons.
I would say they're in Alaska working.
Yeah.
It says here in the book, Camp Rimini in time became the sled-building center for the U.S. military.
Mm-hmm.
So
it was the spot.
High speed, low drag.
Isn't that weird, though, that it would be in Montana and not Alaska that they would be building these?
I don't know. No, because a little bit harsher weather up there in Alaska makes work conditions not as nice.
And they ship them
the
all?
military really doesn't care about your feelings, but maybe in this case they're like, there's dogs involved. We're going to give it a little bit more comfort.
Maybe.
So I don't know.
They have to ship them all up there?
Yeah. But they weren't just Alaska. It said in one of the articles I read that they even used them in the winter months over in Europe to get supplies to troops. So they were probably used quite a lot more than we think and what they wrote down, but that's cool.
That is pretty hardcore.
Who else do we got over there?
Well, the next one I brought to talk about was William L. Arnold from Fishtail. And he served during World War II. He joined the Army of March in 1941. He says 3 friends and I in that area signed up, and shortly we were sent to Fort Missoula, Montana for our physical exams. We were inducted into the United States Army on March 25th, 1941. From the fort, we were transferred to Fort Lewis, Washington. Train or bus transported us, almost all military personnel at the time. At Fort Lewis, we were issued our uniforms, underclothes, shoes, socks, fatigues, suntans, caps, mess kits, canteens, and belts. All this gear packed into a barracks bag made a pretty good load.
I remember those.
Yeah.
So he did boot camp. A large number they were moved to Fort Knox, Kentucky on a troop train. They traveled by day and by night. After arriving in Louisville, they were bussed out to Fort Knox and assigned to barracks. They did a lot of marching. Then he received some training on the firing range with a 30 caliber and 50 caliber machine guns, as well as with a Thompson or Tommy gun, as it was known. Qualified as an expert with a 45 automatic pistol.
Let's take a short break for this You Should Know moment, brought to you by our sponsor, Pinnacle Property of Montana.
You should know the Battle of Hailstone Basin. February 1885, Crow Chief Plentycoo, along with 3 of his men and 4 white settlers from Park City, pursued a band of Blackfoot Indians who had stolen almost 100 horses from the Crow and settlers. They caught up here at Hailstone Basin. In the first shots, 2 of the whites were killed instantly, but Chief Plentycoo downed 2 of the Blackfeet before the rest made their escape over the rims. He scalped the nearest dead enemy to show his people he had counted coup yet again, but always regretted not going back back for his second trophy. The Crow and settlers recovered the stolen horses and the bodies of the 2 fallen white men so they could be returned to their families. In Chief Plentycoo's telling, I learned that white women mourn as ours do. My heart fell to the ground when I heard them crying and wailing for their men, who need not have died if only they had used their heads a little. You should know because it's an early example of the long friendship between the Crows and the white settlers, even if some didn't use their head.
After 2 weeks, he was selected to enter radio operator school to learn how to send and receive messages in Morse code. So then he went to Camp Polk, Louisiana. So it looks like he really traveled quite a bit. In October of 41, we boarded the USS Scott and sailed out under the Golden Gate Bridge. The bridge was comparatively new at this time, having been completed in 1939. I will forever remember looking back at the city of San Francisco and the bridge, wondering if we would ever see that sight again.
Can you imagine?
Yeah. So then he talks about a lot of them got really sick because the waves got higher and higher. By morning, it seemed that everybody was ill. They ended up in Honolulu, enjoyed about 4 days of shore leave. It says for 25 cents you could hire a cab to almost anywhere on the island.
Is it like that now, Donna? When you guys go to Hawaii?
Well, we don't go to Honolulu.
Wow.
It's just a big city, but no.
25 cents.
Yeah, it's like $75 to get you.
He said they were some of the wildest cab drivers I had ever ridden with. So naturally they wanted to make as many quarters as possible. Said they sailed out of Pearl Harbor in the first part of November 1941. It was then that we knew we were headed for Manila, the Philippine Islands, as our destination.
Seems like that would be a long boat ride.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it, like we talked about this earlier about where Montana was in World War II, as far as like just having electricity or running water. And
right.
that. So I'm keeping that
no
in
bathrooms.
mind. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And here's this kid from Fishtail, Montana.
That probably didn't have a bathroom, indoor bathroom.
Yeah, and he is all of a sudden
seeing the Golden Gate Bridge, being shipped out.
Yeah.
Been all over the U.S.
Yeah.
Seeing waves.
Yeah, because he literally crisscrossed from what you were saying.
Mm-hmm. So then this is pretty interesting. It says, we were sailing under complete blackout all the way to the Philippines. Chow lines were so long on the ship, we would get our meal, eat it, and go right back in line for the next meal.
Oh, my God.
By now, we were no longer seasick and could eat anything we could get. Several days later, we sailed into Manila Bay in the Philippines. Near the entrance was, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, Corregidor? Okay. The small island was fortified to guard the entrance to the bay. It was late afternoon on November 20th, 1941. We neared the port area of Manila. Young Filipinos swam out to our ship and would dive for coins we threw into the water. They never missed even a penny.
What ship was he on?
USS Grant. They changed the name of his ship to the USS Grant.
Okay.
It's interesting, though, because he's out there before Pearl Harbor's even.
I think Pearl Harbor was bombed on their way.
Yeah, let me see. We get into that here.
After they left Pearl Harbor, then
Yeah.
He said they were trucked out to Fort Stotsenburg near Clark Field, about 60 miles north of Manila. We set up temporary camp tents at guard duty. That night, we were instructed to be alert for huge python snakes in the area. However, I encountered none that night.
Thankfully.
Yeah. Later, we moved into some barracks nearby. I was particularly interested in a pygmy tribe of people there. They were about 3 to 4 feet tall, and men carried bows and arrows. However, they were friendly. I mean, this guy's seeing a lot in his short time.
Oh, yeah.
he's used to shopping at the Fishtail General Store. just to keep that in perspective.
Says the tanks were left in position through the night with guards on duty. My shift ended at 8 a.m. morning of December 8th, 1941. Keep in mind that it was December 7th in Hawaii. I had applied for a 24-hour leave and planned to go into nearby village for the day. As I was waiting out on the roadway for my relief to arrive, I could hear the drone of many high-flying aircraft. As I looked up, I saw a formation that was too high to identify. However, I took for granted they were some of our Air Corps returning. As they neared the air base, to my astonishment, I could see the bombs falling out of their bomb bays. In a few seconds, they were hitting our airplanes as they were all lined up in readiness to take off, but very few of them got off the ground. Immediately following the bombers came the low-flying fighter planes, strafing everything that was target and setting it on fire. One flew past me so low I could see the Japanese pilot as he looked around for a target. Luckily, he did not see me. Our Air Corps did manage to save a couple of P-40 planes, which was all we had left to battle the Japanese Zeros.
Oh, my gosh.
I think this is something that gets overlooked, that that the Philippines were attacked at the same time. That's another thing I just recently, I guess I just have never paid attention to that. I don't know, but I didn't realize that yeah, because I was watching a YouTube video, some little documentary on that the other day, and they talked about this, how when they attacked Pearl Harbor, they also hit the Philippines and one other place, I think, too. I can't remember where it was, but whatever, obviously Pearl Harbor, for what went down there, it overshadows all of this.
Yes. So it says, about the time of the second wave of the attack, my relief arrived. He said that we were moving out, so we climbed into the tank. I got on the radio and a message came in from the command post for us to mount up and take up a certain position, as they were expecting a paratroops landing force. However, that did not happen. We learned that our barracks had all been bombed, strafed, and burned to the ground by the Japanese raid. All we had left were the clothes on our backs, and there was no need to return to the barracks as there was nothing left there. Jeez. We also learned that Japan attacked Pearl Harbor at the same time and that we were at war with the Imperial Japanese forces. We knew very little about Japan and hardly knew how to identify Japanese from any other Asian people, which we talked about a little bit when we talked about David Thatcher, because he wasn't sure if it was Japanese or Chinese when they were sitting on the coast trying to get to safety. So he goes on to say the Philippine army was ill-equipped, ill-trained, and all out ill-prepared for such an onslaught. Consequently, they were forced to retreat. Some of the tanks were sent north to aid in the repelling invasion, but the Japanese had established a beachhead and the Filipinos were already in full retreat. So he says, by daylight, I was unable to contact anyone by radio. Our radios were old and not the best at that time. We decided to move out of our location. We knew nothing about the surrounding area or which direction to go. Suddenly, we were under fire from the Japanese foot troops. Actually, they surrounded us. Luckily for us, that we were in a tank. We were finally able to commandeer a Filipino civilian to show us the way out of there and back to our command post. By now, 2 other tanks had joined us, and we fought our way out of that trap. We had gone about 50 kilometers when we came upon another bridge that had been blown up. It was possible to get our tanks across the steep bank. It was impossible to get our tanks across the steep banks on both sides. And
so this guy just basically went from nothing into full-out fight for my life.
Yep.
Yeah. That's what it sounds like.
Yep. So he says we had barbed wire strung along the beach on the Manila Bay side of Bataan in case of an attack from that side. On one occasion, sometime in February of 42, I had guard duty along a stretch of that beach from midnight to 8 a.m. At about 4 a.m., the tide came in, bringing the water up past the barbed wire barrier. I noticed a strange odor as the water came in. It was pitch black that night, and an hour or so before dawn. At daybreak, I could see 3 white bodies floating up against the barbed wire. They were bloated up, floating on their backs, no clothes on, and their hands were tied behind their backs. We contacted proper authorities who came and picked them up. I did find out that they had been shot a number of times and they were thought to be Americans. This is heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that book in the bookstore?
Yes. Yeah. It says one night up near the front line on Bataan, I had just laid down to get some sleep when an insect crawled inside my ear.
Oh.
And wouldn't come out.
Okay.
Yeah, we could take floating bodies.
You can't do this.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I won't go through the gory details, but the bug finally did come out of his ear when he was headed to find a doctor or somebody because it was driving us crazy.
Oh.
So it wasn't only the Japanese they had to worry about. It was the bugs and the snakes and the everything.
And again, he was a ranch kid from Fishtail, Montana.
Yeah. So then he says the tanks were used more or less as pillboxes, not good weapons in jungle fighting. Due to the high concentration of people in Bataan, with shortages of food and medical supplies, illness and diseases became rampant. Dysentery and malaria were taking a toll on the American troops as well as the Filipinos. The field hospitals were overflowing. As we had a limited amount of anti-aircraft to deter the Japanese bombers, our defense line was being pushed even further back into the peninsula of Bataan.
Don't you get shots now for malaria?
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah, I'm not sure what
and there was a piece that I skipped over that they did get several shots before they went there, but something's
dealing with malaria and dysentery and all of those
that's
conditions.
from mosquito. Well,
Yep.
I don't know about the dysentery. That's from
From
food, right?
unsanitary type
conditions.
Yeah,
But malaria is from the mosquitoes.
right.
But here's my question. And maybe I don't know. Maybe it was because if they got shots then, maybe they did know. But maybe it just wasn't. We didn't know how to fight that. Then
I'm not sure. We could look that up about whether or not they had vaccinations or for malaria at that time. I can't remember. I'm
must
sure they
not have because they were all getting it.
And how long does that even last? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I have no clue. Are you looking that up over there, Cole?
No, it's work.
I'm like, Cole's on it. We're going to have an answer here any second.
No, I'm going to have to go here in just a couple of minutes. They
Okay.
want to get going.
So he says, when I entered the military in 1941, we received instruction on procedure should the enemy capture us, but I recall nothing about being forced to surrender to the enemy. I actually felt it was a disgrace to surrender, especially to the Japanese. We had fought them for 4 months in the face of overwhelming odds and under more disadvantageous conditions than any other American troops in history.
So they were told to surrender, but he didn't?
He didn't want to, yeah.
Oh, but he still had to.
Yep. It was pointed out that a 4-month stand on Bataan and our 5-month stand on Corregidor were critical. They bought time for the U.S. to regroup in the Pacific Theater of Operations as well as delay the Japanese conquest to Hawaii and Australia. The Japanese soldiers had already relieved us of our wristwatches, rings, cameras, money, and anything of value they wanted. Some of us were lucky enough to still have a canteen and a mess kit. Fortunately for me, I narrowly escaped having to make the death march, as I had been hospitalized the night before the surrender with malaria and dysentery. I was admitted to Hospital 2, which was merely a number of beds set up in the jungle with a few medical corpsmen and a few medical supplies in a tent. The patients were men who had been wounded in battle as well as those who were sick with malaria and other diseases. Strange as it may seem, at that time I was separated from the rest of the tank crew and never came across even one of them again.
I'm sorry to go back to this on the malaria, but I've just looked this up here, and it says that during World War II, there were no malaria vaccines available. And it says the primary method to combat malaria during World War II was not vaccination, but rather through prophylaxis and control measures. The use of drugs like quinine and atabrine was widespread among the troops. Quinine was traditionally used for malaria treatment and prophylaxis, but its supply was severely disrupted after the Japanese captured the Dutch East Indies, a major source of quinine, and atabrine became the substitute. However, these were not vaccines, but rather drugs aimed at preventing or treating infection. So they just manned up and toughed it out.
Let me get this straight. He had to surrender, but he got sick. And then
So
I'm not.
it's at the time of the surrender. He says, we were ordered to put our weapons in a pile at a designated place. I still had my .45 auto pistol in the hospital area. I decided I'd better try to keep my weapon. I saw a good place to stash it under a clump of bamboo. The soil made digging easy, so I put my gun and cartridge belt into a duffel bag and buried them under the bamboo bush. It was dark, so no one saw me. I had in mind that I might get an opportunity to escape, at which time I would surely need my weapon and several rounds of ammunition that were in my belt. So he says he never got the opportunity to escape, nor was I ever able to retrieve my weapon. Maybe it's still there, covered with jungle. So then he was, the Japanese left Hospital 2 as it was, and that's where he was. Hospital 2 had a small supply of canned food and some rice. On one instance, we cut down a palm tree and feasted on the top part of it. We peeled the top down to the heart. It was delicious and tasted like cabbage. So after 30 days of bombardment from the air, as well as an artillery on Bataan, the lush green island of Corregidor was turned into a barren rock. The American troops were protected in the tunnels and bunkers, but without supplies. It became evident they would also be forced to surrender. So General Wainwright negotiated on May 6, 1942, the surrender. At that time, he sent a message. The fighting ceased then after that, and they were all forced to surrender. So, like he said, he left his gun.
So he didn't surrender with the first people, and that was the death march.
Well, yeah.
Because he was in the hospital.
He was in the hospital.
And they didn't do anything to the hospital guys, I guess.
Yeah. Well, they eventually did. Meanwhile, the death march column stretched for miles as it plodded along the north out of Bataan. Japanese troops were guarding both sides of the road and not allowing food or water to be obtained from Filipino civilians along the way. So this is where he talks about Ben Steele, which we have Ben Steele Middle School named for him in Billings. And he got to know Ben, and there's one of Ben's paintings in here, because we all know that Ben did all these paintings of his experiences on the Bataan Death March. He says, I have a list of names of over 2,000 men who died and were buried in another name I cannot pronounce. From June of 1942 to March of 44, some reasonable person had kept a record of the men's names, ranks, and serial numbers and had buried them at this place for safekeeping. After the war, the bodies were moved to a cemetery at Manila, Philippines.
He was fortunate to miss that Bataan death march.
Yes. But then he says we were taken to Manila by a Japanese truck and marched through the city of Bilibid prison. Bilibid was an old abandoned federal prison that had been determined to be unfit for human habiting. So it served as an ideal place for the Japanese to put us POWs. The high walls around it made it escape-proof. So it was easy for them the Japanese to guard. And he says he realized that when the iron gates closed behind him. Every morning, some Japanese soldiers would come inside the main gate and pick a few able-bodied men to go out and work detail. I always tried to get on these details. They would take us out to buildings in Manila occupied by the Japanese troops of occupation forces. We would clean up the places after they used them. These details gave me an opportunity to get some extra food. Filipinos would secretly pass things to us. They despised the Japanese as much as we did. Sometimes we would find something edible in garbage cans. I recall one time finding a small loaf of bread and another time a papaya, including a modern building in downtown Manila that was occupied by some Japanese soldiers. We discovered they did not know how to use modern bathroom facilities. Having used a straddle trench all of their lives, they could really make a mess of the bathroom. Japan had been remarkably civilized since World War II. I mean, the things that this guy is... So he was in that prison for a month, and then the Japanese came and took all the able-bodied men to work in the shipping docks at a port in Manila. So he did that for a while. And then in October of 42, the Japanese again picked out about 30 able-bodied POWs, including myself. We were put aboard a ship which were loaded with dried coconut and headed for Japan. Apparently, the Japanese had gotten cargo from one of the southern islands. They would process the coconut and get oil out of it, as they were hard-pressed for petroleum products. Since the ship's hold was full of coconut, we were kept on topside. We were indeed fortunate after hearing about the hell ships carrying hundreds of POWs to Japan. These prisoners were kept down in the holds with little food, water, or air, and hardly room to sit. Says some of the ships were sunk by American submarines since there was nothing to indicate that American soldiers were on boards. So thousands of American prisoners of war lost their lives on these ships to Japan. He said he was fed fairly well on the coconut ship. He says the crew had a few live chickens and a pig on board, which they butchered to eat with their rice. And we POWs got a small amount of it. After scraping the wormy parts off, we also ate some dried coconut.
Ugh.
I mean, the things that he went through.
He just seemed to be like in the right place at the right time. And I mean, it's his story, so there's thousands of these stories, but you know what I'm saying? Like he was sick, so he didn't have to be on the death march, and then he was this, and then he was picked out 30 guys that now you're going to go on this ship, right? Yeah. So
right.
He was just at the right place at the right time.
Kind of lucked out on a few things,
yeah.
Because like the guys on the Bataan death march. I mean, the number of guys who suffered and died there. I mean, somewhere between I'm reading somewhere between 500 and 650 American POWs died during the march itself. But then they're thinking that potentially up to 1,000 more when considering everybody who died soon after arriving at the camps because of the illness and exhaustion that they had.
So the other thing that I just thought of is, if it's true, which there's no reason for me to think it's not, that the submarines actually hit those ships and sunk them with those men on it. He said thousands of men.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure they didn't keep track of who they put on that ship. The Japanese didn't probably keep track of 500 American soldiers on that ship, right?
No. Later on they did, though. They did do photographs of each of the POWs and gave them a number, which we have Williams
later on
photograph, but not then. No.
Right. So how many families or loved ones still think that they're POWs somewhere, or they got killed over in the jungle and nobody ever found them, and here they're all together on these ships that got sunk by our own military.
Yeah.
That's so sad.
Very. Here's another thing about things he ate. He says, our morning meal was a bowl of rice and watery soup. The evening meal was the same. This prolonged starvation diet was bringing on diseases. Our noon meal consisted of a cold rice ball about the size of a regular softball.
I wonder when he got home if he wanted to eat rice ever again.
Probably not. As time went on, the rice ball began to get smaller and smaller. One morning when they handed our rice ball for that day's lunch, it was not much larger than a golf ball. It was then decided that if they were going to starve us to death, we may as well force their hand and be shot or suffer whatever punishments they dished out. So we all turned around, went back to our quarters, and refused to go to work. The Japanese did not know just what to do. I guess nothing like this had ever happened. After a couple hours of talking and yelling, they increased the size of the rice ball to what it used to be. That is, the size of a softball. We went back to work, and strangely enough, we're not punished for this.
Huh.
So they did stand up to him. He says that anyway, we were issued metal tags with numbers on them, which were to be sewed on the front of our shirts. My number was 633. We had names for the Japanese guards that we used among ourselves. Some that I remember were Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Little Hitler, and other nicknames that fit their personalities. Of course, sometimes we called them names such as bastard, son of a bitch, and worse. We slept on wood floors with thin straw mat coverings where each issued one thin blanket. Straw mats were infested with fleas, and the blankets were infested with lice. We had no way to control the pests. The fleas we picked off by hand, and the eggs found in the seams of our clothing we squished.
Gross.
Yeah.
Conditions are just unimaginable.
Says during the last 6 months, it was my faith that kept me going, along with my determination to survive. It was my belief that someday I would return home to my family in the United States of America and once again have decent food.
How long was he held?
3.5 years.
Holy cow.
Yeah, that must have felt like forever.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And I imagine too, as that war went on, I mean, they just got less and less food because the Japanese, after a while, I believe they were having a hard time feeding their own people. I mean, supplies.
Well, that was kind of like Auschwitz too, right? The
camps.
The camps, they ran out of food.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine those types of conditions.
Yeah. But how cool is that for him to write it all down?
I was just going to say the exact same thing. The fact that he came home, or I'm assuming that's what he did. He came home and wrote it, right? That
he didn't write this, I think, until a little later. He's got a timeline in the back, which is kind of fun. September 2001, began writing this book.
Wow, it took him a while.
Yeah, and I don't believe he ever had any kids. He was married in Billings in 1950. Let's see. November 1945, he arrived home after 4 years.
His whole war experience was pretty...
Did the families know that they're still alive or not, do you think? I mean, he was issued a number, which is also interesting that he knew what that number was because they use like Japan writing, right?
No,
Japanese?
It's a physical number. Like I said, we have it in the museum.
Oh, you do?
Mm-hmm. We have his original photograph too that was taken by the Japanese.
So, but they used Japanese writing. Okay, his number wasn't, but don't they use like Japanese numbers?
There was with it.
They probably had it both, right? So
yeah, both was on it. Yeah.
So I wonder if his family knew that he was a POW or not. They just didn't know.
I think
they stopped receiving letters from him. I'm assuming he sent letters home, so they stopped receiving letters. I don't even know how that works as a family, but you've got to be like.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I mean he probably doesn't mention anything about that, but I think a lot of those guys, I mean, a lot of them weren't able to get anything out, but at a certain point, the Japanese did start to publicize who they held captive.
Right, and the fact that he had a number would
show that he's identified. They knew who he was.
In the Army, right? He was Army, right?
Yeah.
So somebody would know and hopefully tell his family, but it's so interesting.
Yeah.
I think the Red Cross was given some limited access at times to a lot of the POWs, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, it said he had a little bit of that somewheres in here. It does say he was sent to Osaka, Japan, and they were unloaded and marched through the streets, which were lined with Japanese civilians. We were spit at and had rocks thrown at us. I guess it was good that we had Japanese soldiers with us for protection. They were housed in barracks a short distance from the shipyards where they were going to be working. So they were put to work.
Huh.
Just trying to... One morning in August of 1945, we got up and all the Japanese had vanished. We stayed in the compound all that day. The next day, a new bunch of Japanese arrived. The one in charge told us Japan was afraid that the Russians were going to take over, so the Japanese had made peace with the United States. The days after that, fighter planes from our American carriers flew over the compound and dropped sea bags of food and clothing to us. It was only then that we believed the war was over.
So they knew where they were even.
Yeah.
Wow, what that must have felt like to see those planes dropping that stuff to them.
I bet they didn't know at first what it was.
Yeah.
Well, his whole experience of World War II was, I mean, he's just right from the get-go. Like, we got attacked at Pearl Harbor, they got attacked at the Philippines, and very shortly, now he's a prisoner of war for the whole deal.
Yeah.
Till about the time he says in here, they heard something about Doolittle.
Oh.
Too, raiding Tokyo, so.
That, and I was wondering, I was going to bring that up, him being from Fishtail, David Thatcher growing up around Absorky.
They had to have known one another. They had to have
known each other.
Yeah.
Wow. That's...
Maybe they didn't know each other, but they probably heard of each other. I don't know. I mean, it was back
then going to school. I mean, these were small schools.
But they didn't. They were far enough apart. You know, they didn't travel like we do now. I mean, it's nothing for us to get into a car and.
Because David Thatcher was south of Ollie's Corner, Absorky.
Mm-hmm.
He was his place, so he wasn't far from Fishtail.
They'd have to have known at least their names. You'd think. He doesn't say anything in there of that?
No.
Well, in my head, they knew each other and used to go horseback riding.
I would bet they did.
Did some hunting together.
I wouldn't be surprised if they were in school at the same time, because William says he graduated from high school.
Did you ever interview him?
No. I did not, unfortunately.
What year did he die? He didn't start writing that till 2001.
It's really interesting, though. These are big-time events. These are big-time historical experiences that, we hear about.
It's in our history books.
It's in our local history, and everybody's history books, but it's fascinating that it's in our local history books that these are guys that were at these major, terrible events during World War II.
Yeah. So I think, if I remember correctly, David Thatcher graduated in 38 or 39.
39, I remember.
Yes. And then William graduated in 1937. So he says he was born in Fishtail, May 4th, 1917. He attended country grade school. In 32, he graduated 8th grade, took exam at Columbus. In 33, began high school at Absorky. In May of 34, he left high school, unable to pay bus fare to school. And then May of 34, he joined the Civilian Conservation Corps, earned $25 a month through the summer. He re-entered high school in 34.
Oh, it was important to him to go to school.
And then graduated from Absorky High School in 37.
Wow.
I didn't realize that they had to pay bus fare back then.
I didn't either.
Yeah.
But it was obviously it was important for him to finish school because he worked for it.
Mm-hmm. And then he worked at the 4K Dude Ranch near Dean, and then he worked for the O.J. Parker Ranch, and then he enlisted in March of 41.
And then what did he do when he came home?
When he came home, he... Get back to the page here. Was discharged from the Army in 1946 and went to work at a wool warehouse in Billings. By August of 1950, he married Trudy Holmes in Billings, and in 55 he started work at the McKesson and Robbins, a drug wholesale company in Billings. And in 1970, he left the drug company and started work for the Montana Department of Highways, and in 82, he retired at age 65.
Wow.
His wife died in 1987. He married another lady a year later. His mom passed away in 88 at the age of 95, and he suffered a heart attack, which required 4 bypass surgeries in 94.
Jeez.
In 2001, had abdominal surgery involving removal of his gallbladder, appendix, and 32 inches of his small intestine.
Holy cow.
And
How
then-
old was he then?
Well, he was born in 17, so 83, 84 years old.
When he had major abdominal surgery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
he-
has improved a lot since then.
And he lived
It's
through
been
that.
Heart surgery.
Yeah.
Quadruple bypass. No big deal. The guy was a POW. He can handle that. That's crazy.
There's, like I said, several of his family that still live
I wonder
around
if-
the Fishtail area.
There's no way to ever know this. But, I wonder if all the rice and all the yucky bugs led to the intestinal problems.
It's actually probably a pretty good theory or question
Yeah.
there, because a lot of the times, not that I know much about dysentery, but the little I know about it, it seems like it's once you've had dysentery, it can affect you for like the rest of your life.
it
Like it
makes
can really
sense.
mess you up.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no way. I guess somebody could do a study, something, but still.
100% he had to have suffered a lot of dysentery in those POW camps. There's just no way he missed out on that. And so I would think that it's very likely that he had issues his whole life because of that.
Well, and when you're not fed protein for how long?
Years.
The part that I would really want to know, and who knows if this is in that book, but what that experience was like afterwards, once you are back in with your, the rest of the Americans and heading back to the States after that kind of an experience. I just would love to know, or
PTSD.
yeah, like what is that? Like just, yes, exactly. What were you dealing with mentally? Like to feel normal again.
I can't even.
How long did it take to feel normal,
to
if
not
ever?
to not be. Even to how long did it take for you to be able to just eat a normal meal? Because you can't just pick up a whole plate of food now and eat it. You'll get sick.
Yeah. And back then too, they didn't look at PTSD like they do now. Back then it was just like, okay, go back to work.
Well, that's why I asked, what did he do? He held down his jobs, it sounded like, but how do you get through that? You were a prisoner of war for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And you weren't like getting paid.
Now, I guess the good thing is you were
our
around
prisoners
other
of war.
people. You weren't.
Yeah.
He was working. He wasn't.
He managed to get into the
Yeah.
right direction to be able to work,
Besides
which helped him, I'm sure.
starving, he was kept busy, and I don't know if he was beaten or anything. It didn't sound like that, but he was busy with his hands. That always helps.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, there's a lot I think to read between the lines. There's obviously he's going through the information pretty quickly, just putting out the facts of the matter without, the general outline of what he went through there. But I'm sure there was a lot in between there that he saw either happen around him or that he experienced himself. That
Mentally, there has to be some. Also, I find it interesting that he didn't write any of this down till 2001.
Right. It must have been, I don't know, maybe his family, or maybe he just decided, I need to write this down.
It had to be hard to revisit that, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he didn't have any kids, so his kids wouldn't have been asking. Maybe it was his second wife that...
Well, and his sisters and brothers, because he had quite a few siblings, so...
Well, it wasn't until after his first wife died, he had a heart attack, and his mom died, that he decided to write this down.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Well, these are incredible stories of incredible guys who are right here from our community. And then how many people just go, rub shoulders with these guys at the grocery store and just not know what they went through.
I do have a question about Matovich. So he didn't write a book, but did he talk to his son a lot about what he did, or?
Yeah, because his son's the one that donated the sled to us.
And he donates his time.
Yeah.
So he must have a lot of stories about it, I'm assuming. Or his dad showed him how to make, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that family, Butch's son, is military as well. So, long military line there.
Wow.
Butch was military too?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, okay.
Incredible stories. Thank you, Penny.
You bet.
Thank you, Donna.
Yep.
Thank you to Pinnacle Property Montana making this possible. These are always so interesting. Learning all of this stuff, it creates a richer experience. I noticed that just driving around, knowing the history of this area, knowing the history of the people, I can now point things out, and I probably annoy my own family with that a little bit, but they say they're not annoyed, but I'm always like, hey, right up here, this happened, or hey, this happened. And knowing our history, it just makes, makes it a richer experience.
Yep.
So much to learn from it all. So
helps you appreciate it all, too, where you live.
Yeah, very much so.
Yep.
All right, thank you. We'll do it again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
This episode of the Big Fat Podcast in our They Gazed on the Beartooths series was brought to you by Pinnacle Property of Montana. Let Pinnacle Property of Montana help you make your Montana dream come true. Their contact information is below in the description. You can show your support by hitting that like button, subscribing if you haven't already, and sharing this episode with your history-loving friends. We'll see you next time.